In the last episode of The Bad Batch, we once again return to the world of Bracca, a junk planet first introduced to us in the Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order game. This is a world where things went to be forgotten, both military ships and workers, like Cal Kestis, former Padawan and survivor of Order 66. It's also a place where tons of military equipment can be reclaimed and reused. This is why Clone Force 99 is on Bracca. They are looking for a functional medical bay in one of the many derelict Venator Class Star Destroyers still parked on its surface. Today's question is, why did Palpatine retire all of the Venator Class Star Destroyers and begin phasing them out when they were still perfectly good for combat and military operations? The Venator Class Star Destroyer only premiered 3 or 4 years earlier with the beginning of the Clone Wars. This is a 1,137 meter long ship with a complement of several hundred starfighters. It formed the backbone of the Republic Navy. Although it was classified as a Star Destroyer, the Venator class bet fit the role of a carrier. The Venator lacked offensive weaponry for a ship of its size, but more than made up for it with all of the fighters it had on board. This actually reflects the more modern naval doctrine accepted by the Republic Navy. Instead of getting your large ships caught up in dangerous close-quarter battles through exchanging turbo lasers, the idea was to launch your starfighters and attack the enemy from long range, and keeping your carrier out of the range of their heavy guns. The invention of ship-launched aircraft and aircraft carriers drastically changed naval combat here on Earth. Fleets that used to be built around battleships in the early 20th century were being built around aircraft carriers by the end of World War II. Judging by the Old Republic's past usage of military vessels, the Venator Class Star Destroyer could have been relevant and operational for at least several decades, if not centuries more. The Old Republic fielded the Hammerhead cruiser for thousands of years in different variants. So what happened along the way? Why did Emperor Palpatine replace the Venator Class Star Destroyer for a ship that was 3 times as expensive to build, had much less hangar space, and relied mainly on line-of-sight turbo lasers? Well, first and foremost, we often forget that the job of a ruler is not to just field the best equipped and efficient military force possible. Rulers, even autocratic dictators, must play the game of politics and meet some of the expectations of the populace. When Emperor Palpatine started the Galactic Empire, he inherited a mess that his predecessor, Supreme Chancellor Palpatine, had created. The federal budget, for one, had ballooned out of control. I mean, the Republic didn't even have a standing federal military for 1,000 years before the Clone Wars. And so the creation of the Clone Army and the Republic Navy added a massive amount of money to the deficit every year. The war itself had cut off many regions of the galaxy away from the core center of the Republic. This led to less taxes, less tariffs, and trade. Many productive areas of the galaxy were also thrown into chaos by fighting, so we lose economic value there as well. Almost every industry in the galaxy was affected in one way or another, and the Republic government was running dangerously low in capital and resources. Palpatine's hostile takeover of the international banking system bought him some time in the short run, but now with the war over, Palpatine needed to figure out a better way to bolster the economy and justify his actions. And so Palpatine decided to orient the galaxy in a military-first strategy, which was very similar actually to Kim Il-sung's idea of Songun. This is North Korea's version of military-first policy. The first thing it did was elevate the Korean People's Army to the highest rank in society. Those who partook in the armed services were seen as politically and socially more important individuals. Members of the military service were given access to more resources, more rights, more jobs, and better living conditions. The North Korean government also granted the military the highest economic and resource allocation priority. The Galactic Empire's military was given the same kind of support and power. This was done to secure the Empire's political base, but it was also done to attract people to the armed services. While the pay might not be great, the prestige, respect, and promise for adventure given to service members does attract more individuals to enlist. In reality, the Imperial military just became a pool for free labor for the Imperial government and Palpatine. The few benefits that you got from serving were just freedoms that Palpatine's government took away from the populace in the first place. In order to continue expanding the economy, you need someone spending money, whether it's new immigrants or refugees you bring into the empire, or in this case, the central government giving out massive contracts to business enterprises like Quad Drive Yards to start construction of the Imperial Class Star Destroyer. Now, the Venator Class Star Destroyer that it was replacing, as we mentioned before, is still very functional and arguably better suited for the job at hand. The average lifespan of the Republic Venator fleet couldn't be more than just a few years. They were practically new. I mean, the U.S. Navy has 50-year-old ships still in operation, like the USS Blue Ridge amphibious command ship. Now, it would have been possible for Emperor Palpatine to continue expanding the military, but keep the Venator Class Star Destroyer and focus on other things, like building the Imperial Academy system instead of building the Imperial Class Star Destroyer. Maybe, but the thing is, with the war ending, the Empire's military-industrial complex was under a severe threat. Prior to the United States falling into a permanent state of war, large American manufacturers would do their civic duty during conflicts like World War II and switch from building consumer appliances to bombs and tanks. The retooling of U.S. manufacturing during World War II was one of the major American miracles and accomplishments in the 20th century. Were it not for the massive transformation of American manufacturing, it's very possible that the Axis powers could have succeeded. The U.S. not only provided weapons and materials for its own forces, but for almost every ally fighting against Axis forces. We're not just talking about British and Russian forces fighting against Hitler in Europe. Even the Chinese nationalists fighting against the Japanese Empire managed to get their hands on a Sherman tank, which most likely was produced in a Detroit auto plant or somewhere in upstate New York. But when the war ends, of course, a lot of this newly developed infrastructure is either shuttered, sold off, or retooled into some other thing that would work during peacetime. Emperor Palpatine decided that losing the military-industrial complex that sprung up during the Clone Wars would be a massive problem. It would also decrease the Empire's ability to acquire new weapons. It could be seen as a potential security threat. And so Palpatine preserved the Republic military-industrial complex by nationalizing many factories and resources, but also giving those factories work, like the new contract for the Imperial Class Star Destroyer. The reality is the Venator Class Star Destroyer was better suited for creating stability throughout the galaxy. What the Galactic Empire needed was not a line of impenetrable battleships armored head to toe. It needed a fast, efficient peacekeeping force that could quickly respond to any threats. The Venator Class Star Destroyer, with its massive complement of starfighters, could be placed in one region and control the entire region by simply sending out groups of starfighters. A Star Destroyer can be only in one place at one time. It only had short-range TIE fighters that didn't even have hyperdrives. And plus, it's overkill and scares the crap out of the local populace. But then again, that is the entire point of the Imperial Class Star Destroyer. Budget and responsible fiscal policy aside, for individuals like Wilhelm Tarkin, the Imperial Navy wasn't just a military force, it was also a powerful propaganda tool. Wilhelm Tarkin had grown up in an extremely violent and toxic world. His family's coming-to-age ritual was sending their young teenage boys into the wilderness to survive for several days. This wilderness, of course, was full of wild apex predators, and death was usually a certainty. Tarkin somehow survived those ordeals and made it to Palpatine's inner circle of close advisors with a great amount of PTSD and probably emotional issues. Tarkin believed that the Empire could not be physically suppressed by a military force. Instead, it had to depend on the threat of violence. The Imperial Class Star Destroyer fits into the strategy somewhere in between the stoic and authoritarian stormtrooper uniforms and the massive Death Star laser. Simply put, the Imperial Class Star Destroyer is not about smart economic policy or smart military policy, it's about intimidation. This is why the Venator Class Star Destroyer finds itself sitting in the trash heaps of Bracca. So there you have it, guys. So that is our explanation. So that's our explanation about why the Venator was replaced by the Imperial Class Star Destroyer. It's very much symbolic of the transition between the Republic to the Galactic Empire. It's two very different type of government styles and two different type of philosophies that were used by the federal government to control its populace. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. And as usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.